We stand on guard for thee.
Let the doors be open. Que l'on ouvre les portes. Monsieur. Beautifully done. Statements by members. Déclaration de député. The honourable member for Brampton East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 25 years ago today, Toronto's NBA franchise officially became the Toronto Raptors. And ever since then, the sport of basketball has been growing rapidly across our great nation. We may all have our differences when it comes to the sport of hockey, but we are all united by our passion for the Toronto Raptors. 5.8 million Canadians watched Game 7 on Sunday night, and it didn't disappoint. With 4 seconds left on the shot clock, Kawhi Leonard hit the game-winning shot to send our team to the Eastern Conference Finals. Tonight is Game 1, Mr. Speaker, and I want to encourage all my honorable colleagues to watch the game and wish our team well. Let's go Raptors, we the North.
The honourable member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Speaker, 342 scholarships, 80 apprenticeships, resulting in 63 job placements and counting, is exactly what Bolt, Building Opportunities for Life Today, set out to do. They are creating an opportunity for under-resourced youth by connecting them to careers in construction. This Tridel initiative is a perfect example of how industry, government, and unions come together to address two critical issues facing Canadians: youth unemployment and the need for young adults to enter the skilled trades. Since 2007, Bolt has raised over $3 million by creating awareness and supporting education and training to secure youth employment in the construction industry. Bolt est un programme puissant.
Bolt is a powerful program. It's already got a proven track record of turning lives around and building a better future for our young people. I invite my colleagues to join me in applauding this awesome program and the generosity of Tridel for supporting young people while creating jobs in an industry of vital importance to the economy of Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are appalled by criminals who target seniors. And that's why I rise today to raise awareness of seniors' abuse and in support of Bill C-206, an act to amend the Criminal Code, abuse of vulnerable persons. Whether from telephone or online scams, forgery, identity theft, or misplaced trust, seniors are vulnerable. I know how easily elderly Canadians can become victims of financial abuse. My grandfather and his companion were victims of fraud committed by a caregiver. It happened during the final months of my grandfather's life, and sadly he did not live to see the perpetrator punished. Bill C-206 will make the age of the victim and exploitation for financial gain aggravating factors which must be considered at sentencing. Tougher sentences for cowardly criminals that prey on the vulnerable will send a strong signal that Canadians do not tolerate the abuse of seniors, and so I urge all members to support Bill C-206.
Absolutely. The honourable member for Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
It is my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to all participating in and attending the 14th annual Manitou Abbey Festival in Winnipeg. The Manitou Abbey Festival brings people together from across Canada and from around the world to experience the very best in Indigenous music, art, and culture in an effort to unify, educate, and inspire. The festival will start today with the lighting of the sacred fire at the Odina Circle at the Forks and includes a friendship dance to welcome everyone attending. This wonderful celebration offers all Canadians the opportunity to honor and develop a deeper understanding of Indigenous culture and heritage and celebrate its importance in Canada's multicultural mosaic. Thank you to all the organizers for their hard work and dedication to making this event a success. I would also like to extend my best wishes for an enjoyable and memorable festival for all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. Well done.
Député d'Algoma, Manitoulin, Cap.
Honourable member for Algoma, Manitoulin, Kapuskasing.
On Witwin-Kun unceded territory are proving that you don't have to come from a big place to do great things. With help from teacher mentor Chris Mara, a 2018 Prime Minister's Award for Teaching Excellent recipient, 20 students competed as one of only 5 Canadian teams at the first championship robotics competition that brings together teams from around the globe. The students from the Wikwimacong High School First Robotics Team 5672 traveled to Detroit in April to compete against 600 teams. They capped their inspirational journey by being one of 3 teams shortlisted for the prestigious Chairman's Award, which recognizes the impact teams have on their community and region. Although the Manitoulin team was among the smallest competing, they were buoyed by support they received from their own community and across Canada. It was clear their outreach in nearby communities and through social media set them apart. Please join me in congratulating these amazing students whose youthful leadership makes us so proud, and thanking all those who supported them on their amazing run.
The Honourable Member for Alfred Pellant. Mr. Speaker, it's essential to recognize the contributions and engagement of seniors across Canada. It's equally important to recognize the valuable work by associations and organizations that support their well-being. Today, I'd like to congratulate the Laval Seniors Association on its 45 years of service. Since 1974, rain or shine, the association is there to provide the necessary services and supports to ensure our seniors' independence and quality of life. Through its various activities, this community centre works to free our seniors from isolation. Thank you for 45 years' service to our seniors. Thanks for helping them remain active in our community. And thanks for making a real difference.
Honourable Member for Brandon-Souris.
I rise today to congratulate Canadians of Ukrainian heritage, as well as all Ukrainians around the world, on the occasion of Vyshyvanka Day. Every year, as we mark this day, we acknowledge the importance of Ukrainian embroidery as a symbol of unity. Today and in the coming weeks, Canadians of Ukrainian heritage will wear their embroidered shirts to remind one another of the struggles they have to overcome to establish an independent state, which Canada was the first to recognize. The Vyshyvanka unites all Ukrainians living at home and abroad. It serves as an important reminder of the ongoing challenges Ukraine is facing today. We will always stand with the people of Ukraine in their struggle for sovereignty and territorial integrity, and we will never recognize the illegal annexation of Crimea and occupation of Donbass. On behalf of Canada's Conservatives, I thank all members of the Ukrainian community in Canada for organizing and taking part in the multiple events commemorating this special day. Happy Vyshyvanka Day.
The Honourable Member for Brampton South.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in the House to talk about the wonderful work being done by our government. Since 2015, 1 million new jobs have been created across Canada, better than advertised. 57,000 seniors are out of poverty. Almost 300,000 children lifted out of poverty as well. For infrastructure, Doug Ford has stood in the way of us helping Ontarians. Exactly. Since 2018, we have $11 billion committed to Ontario. However, construction season is starting and Doug Ford Conservatives are not taking the step needed. Shame.
No kidding.
And instead of busy spending taxpayer dollars on political ads, Brampton needs its fair share of infrastructure investment.
Bravo. That's right.
I urge the Ford Conservatives to think of all Ontarians, including Bramptonians, and do what is right to approve it.
L'Honorable Député.
The Honourable Member for Montarville.
Mr. Speaker, there are great people in my riding that works hard to make this country a better place. It is the case of Mrs. Rita Plante, an elementary school teacher from William Latta School. Mrs. Plante created with her student a quilt of 6 feet by 6 feet, representing realities from all the provinces and territories in Canada. Not only in this masterpiece is beautiful, but it helped our student understand the abundance of diversity that lies within our country, a diversity that is one of our biggest strengths in Canada. Mrs. Plante is here today with his 56 wonderful students and parents to see her exposed piece of artwork in the Wellington building and to learn where democracy takes place in this country. I invite this House to check out this lovely quilt and would like to thank Mrs. Plante for dedicating her career to creating the leaders of tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister promised transparency and accountability. He said, quote, sunlight is the world's best disinfectant. But he shut down 2 committee investigations into his attempted interference in a criminal prosecution, and he's blocking the release of information in defense of Vice Admiral Mark Norman. The Prime Minister kicked out 2 ministers for telling Canadians the truth. The Prime Minister tried to hide a $10.5 million payment to a convicted terrorist, and then said, quote, veterans are asking for more than we are able to give. The Prime Minister promised a, quote, collaborative relationship with provinces and territories, but 8 provinces oppose his No More Pipelines Bill C-69, and 5 provinces are fighting his carbon tax. A year ago, the Liberals said spending billions of dollars would get the Trans Mountain expansion built, quote, immediately, but not a single inch has been built. And he also defended funding anti-energy activists who want to stop it through Canada's summer jobs while giving Canadian tax dollars to China to build pipelines in Asia. Clearly, this Prime Minister is not as advertised.
The honourable member for London North Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to honour the Arva Flour Mill, North America's oldest continuously operating water-powered commercial mill. Located steps outside of London North Centre, this iconic mill was established in 1819. It's a small business that has been owned and operated for 4 generations by the Scott family. In 2016, the historic mill was faced with a stop work order. Though efforts to make their machinery compliant appeared daunting, I worked with the mill owner, Mike Matthews, to find a possible solution. With the guidance of Andy Spreet, a widely respected local engineer in London, the Minister of Employment, the Minister's staff, and many others, we found a solution that saw the importance of safety and history merged together. I'd also like to thank my colleague from across the aisle, the member for Lambton Kent Middlesex, who also worked hard to secure a very positive outcome. Congratulations to everyone at the Arva Flour Mill. 200 years has never looked so good. Wow. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Parkdale High Park.
Mr. Speaker, last December I packed my bags and headed to COP24, the UN Climate Change Summit. I was compelled to go after reading the IPCC report, where scientists issued a clarion call that the time to act on climate change is now. What I learned was shocking about the impact of rising water levels on Pacific Island nations and habitat destruction on Indigenous peoples. What I remember is the UN leadership pleading with the nations of the world to take action. That is why it is so puzzling when elected leaders in this country challenge the ability of the federal government to do exactly that.
Shame.
Climate change is not just a national problem, it's an international one. And national governments have both the ability and the responsibility to act. That's what the Saskatchewan court confirmed when they upheld our price on pollution, calling climate change, quote, one of the greatest existential issues of our time. Mr. Speaker, in the fight against climate change, I and our government will not relent. The global stakes are simply too high, and the children of Canada deserve no less. Merci beaucoup.
The honourable member for Bellechasse-les-Etchemins-Lévis.
That's the slogan on the Manitoba license plate. And being there last week, I can tell you it's just as advertised. The folks in Winnipeg are friendly indeed. La chaleur des Franco.
The warmth of French Canadians in St. Boniface is contagious.
Someone who is not as advertised. He ran on delivering transparency, he failed. He ran on electoral reform, he failed. He ran on making life more affordable, but he's raising taxes, he failed. Voters will pass judgment on broken promises of the Liberal leader, who is simply not just as advertised. It's time to change, Mr. Speaker, for something better. A responsible Conservative government by a genuine leader who will focus on getting Canadians ahead.
The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
It was a general strike, Mr. Speaker. On May 15, 1919, the call had been made for all workers to put down their tools at 11 a.m. The first on strike were the female telephone workers who failed to show up for their 7 a.m. shift. Today is the 100th anniversary of the 1919 Winnipeg strike. I want to acknowledge the importance of a labour movement in Canada. Unions matter. Unions represent people, people who work hard, support their families, and contribute contribute to their communities and our economy. Today, I thank those pioneers. The labor movement has been essential to promoting fairness and inclusion in our economy. Unions fight for the middle class and have been driving force behind exceptional progress made on behalf of women, LGBTQ workers, Indigenous workers, workers with disabilities. When we were elected, we committed to be a real partner to labor. We stand by that commitment, and we'll keep working on behalf of the workers and Canada's middle class.
The honourable member for Vancouver East.
Hidden within a 392-page omnibus budget bill, the Liberal government has attempted to sneak through dangerous changes to Canada's asylum system, all in an attempt to look tough on borders. They have caved to the pressure and misinformation campaigns fueled by the Conservatives on asylum seekers, and they're now attempting to score cheap political points ahead of an election at the expense of humanity. The Liberals failed to do a gender-based plus analysis of these changes. The disproportionate impacts they would have on women and girls fleeing violence is breathtaking. Women's organizations in Van East, such as Atira Women's Resource Society, BC Society of Transition Homes, Downtown Eastside Women's Centre, Migrant Workers Centre, and the Vancouver Rape Relief and Women's Shelter, signed an open letter with 40 other women's organizations from across Canada calling on the Prime Minister to withdraw these harmful changes. I stand firmly with these true feminists and echo their call. Stop the fake feminism. Withdraw these changes.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, 4 years ago, the Liberal Party offered Canadians a platform chock full of nice promises, which they haven't kept. They promised 3 tiny deficits. Instead, we got 3 whoppers amounting to almost $70 billion. Fail. They promised 0 deficit in 2019. Instead, they tabled a budget with a deficit of $19.5 billion. Fail. They promised election reform. After crisscrossing Canada for nothing, consulting people, they reneged on that. Fail. They promised the world Canada's back. So they said, fail. Relations have soured with our main partners, the U.S., China, and Japan, and Canadians were ashamed of their Prime Minister in India. Fail. Yes, Mr. Speaker, Canadians and Quebecers will have the opportunity soon to tell the Liberals they failed.
Honourable member for Guelph.
Mr. Speaker, in 2017, we challenged communities to develop bold ideas to improve the lives of their residents through the Smart Cities Challenge, and boy, they delivered. Over 200 communities submitted ambitious proposals, and yesterday, Bridgewater, Nova Scotia, communities in Nunavut, La Ville de Montréal, and my hometown of Guelph and Wellington County all won. In Guelph and Wellington County, we want to become Canada's first circular food economy so that we can improve access to food, turn waste into resource, and that's just the beginning. Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to congratulate the other winning communities that will be able to turn their ideas into reality.
The hard work begins to turn these ideas into reality. I know they're up for the challenge, and go Storm, go.
Questions orales. Oral questions. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I trust I can speak for all members of this House when I say that this morning I was shocked and horrified by a recently released recording broadcast by APTN News of an RCMP officer questioning a young female Indigenous sexual assault victim. Obviously, this line of questioning was appalling and insensitive to the young woman who was coming forward with her story. I'd like to ask the Minister of Public Safety if he can update the House as to whatever reviews he might be contemplating to ensure that this type of thing does not happen in the future.
The Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for the Leader of the Opposition's comment. What was revealed in that video was absolutely abhorrent. The apparent attitudes and techniques that were on display in 2012 are profoundly outdated, offensive, and wrong. The RCMP and all police forces must work continuously to conduct themselves appropriately, no survivor of sexual assault should ever fear that their case will not be taken seriously or that they will be re-victimized in the process.
Yeah.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister claims that his government, quote, met all its obligations with respect to third-party records applications. But what he fails to tell is the fact that they had to receive a court order to do that. Mark Norman's lawyer said about the documents, quote, none of that came willingly. We have been day in and day out trying to get that material. It should have been handed over. Exactly. It should have been handed over to our RCMP. It should have been handed over to the prosecution. It was not. Can the Prime Minister explain why not?
Honourable Minister of Border Security.
Mr. Speaker, let me be very, very clear for the member opposite. The government has met all of its obligations with respect to third-party record applications. All documents from the priority individuals were identified by the defence in February, and they were in fact provided to the court. But, Mr. Speaker, it's important to understand as well, all decisions with respect to that information are made by public servants and not by the government. And in this case, all decisions were overseen by the court.
Leader of the Opposition.
All right, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about all those decisions. Decisions were made to block documents. Yep. It took a court order for the evidence that finally exonerated Mark Norman to be produced. Departmental officials were using code words to get around access to information requests. So, will the government, will the Minister of Justice conduct an inquiry to determine why these steps were taken to interfere and obstruct in this case?
Honourable Minister of Border Security.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And at the risk of repeating myself, the review of these documents to ensure that they are truly responsive to the request of the defence was overseen by public servants and the court. The Department of Justice's only involvement in this matter was to provide government records, to respond to the request from the defence, to help support the case. The Department of Justice processed the 52 requests on behalf of 7 departments, and this process determined the documents that were relevant.
Deputy.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the facts speak for themselves. The Prime Minister did everything he could to cover up the truth. He prevented Norman's defence team from obtaining all the documents they needed for his defence. Furthermore, he knows full well that code words were used for the name of Norman to get around access to information requests. Despite all the evidence before him and before the Canadian public, the Prime Minister still refuses to apologize to Admiral Norman and his family. Why?
Border Security.
Mr. Speaker, our government has been very willing to and have acknowledged the dedicated service of Admiral Norman. And in fact, it was the Defence Minister who first expressed regret for the experience of General Norman. But let me be very clear. This was an investigation conducted entirely independent by the RCMP without any government involvement or interference. And the prosecution and all decisions with respect to the prosecution were made by the Director of Public Prosecution entirely independent of any government influence. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, in this case, the Director of Public Prosecution's authority came from the Ontario Provincial...
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, yesterday when we asked for an apology to Admiral Norman, the Prime Minister refused. Possibly he doesn't want to apologize because he doesn't think he needs to. Or perhaps he's disappointed that his plan to destroy him didn't work. One way or another, the Prime Minister needs to be accountable. Why not show some good faith and apologize to Admiral Mark Norman now?
Minister of Border Security.
The obligation of the government is to support the independent work of the RCMP and not to engage in any interference in their independent investigations. That took place in this case, Mr. Speaker. Their investigations were entirely independent of government. The decisions of the Public Prosecution Service were equally independent of any influence of government. Our responsibility is to ensure that the integrity of the judicial process is maintained, and in this case, it absolutely was.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government gave $12 million to Loblaws, saying that it would help tackle climate change. Then they exempted new oil sands projects from an environmental review. And then this week, they brought forward a motion on the climate emergency that does not even include measures that need to be taken. When will this government understand that nice words are not enough to tackle the biggest crisis we have ever been faced with? Honourable Minister for the Environment. Mr. Speaker, it is clear that we have a climate emergency. We have seen it throughout Canada. We have seen it in the National Capital Region with the flooding, forcing people to move from their homes. We have a plan, but what I'd like to ask the NDP is, because it's not very clear, we have a plan for the economy and the environment. They've already flip-flopped on the NDP side. They said they supported the LNG project. Now they don't. That represents 10,000 jobs. We're tackling climate change, but we are also creating jobs. We've created 1 million jobs, and we're very proud to what we've been doing. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
The fact is, the Liberals give $12 million to Loblaws for fridges and then give their billionaire buddies vote to deny workers a living wage. Liberals talk about climate emergency, but exempt oil sand projects from environmental reviews. And young workers not only face an increasingly perilous planet, but also a future of increasingly precarious work. Why can't this Liberal government understand that their approach is failing? Why won't they join the New Democrats and fight climate change in a way that leaves no worker and no community behind?
Honourable Minister of Environment.
It seems that the leader has a plan to leave 10,000 workers behind because he's flip-flopped on a project that was approved by an NDP government in BC that is all in on climate change. We all need to come together on climate change. That is why we brought in a motion for a climate emergency. I certainly hope everyone in the House will support it, that they will support serious climate action, they will support creating of good jobs, supporting making life more affordable, because that's exactly what we're doing.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
After Conservatives bought the Phoenix Pay system from IBM, they signed a contract to help that was valued at just under $6 million. 8 years later, it's ballooned to almost $400 million. The contract has changed 46 times. Only Liberals and Conservatives working together could mess it up so poorly. This is great news for IBM, but bad news for taxpayers. Instead of giving millions to private companies, why not use public workers under fair contracts to finally fix this mess?
Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement.
Mr. Speaker, we continue to act with laser focus on addressing the Phoenix Pay system. We know how completely unacceptable it is that public servants still continue to not be paid. Mr. Speaker, IBM is a partner in this, and we need IBM to continue on along this journey with us, and we are holding IBM to account. In addition, contractual amendments, Mr. Speaker, are just part of any relationship with an ongoing partner, but I can assure everyone that this problem is being fixed. We are moving up. We've reduced the queue by almost 40% in 1 year. We are delivering for Canadians. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Mr. Speaker, people are having trouble accessing the services they need, while the Liberals give priority to rich companies. Meanwhile, individuals working for this government aren't being paid because of the Phoenix Pay system, but the Liberals paid $385 million more to IBM for a system that doesn't work. Rather than make big companies their priority, when will the Liberals start making people their priority? The Honourable Minister of Public Services. Mr. Speaker, we are working extremely hard to stabilize the Phoenix Pay system. We have reduced the queue by 40% over the past year. We are transitioning to a new system. We are working with the unions to deliver. We can assure you that this is a priority for this government. People deserve to be paid.
Member for Milton.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday this House of Commons unanimously stood and agreed and thanked Vice Admiral Mark Norman for his years of service to this country and as well apologized for the treatment over the past 3.5 years. It was reported by some media this morning that unfortunately the Prime Minister wasn't present in the House for that apology, and I'm wondering if he would like to take the opportunity now to apologize himself for the treatment of Vice Admiral Mark Norman.
You're here. Good question.
The honourable member is an experienced member and will know that members are not permitted to draw attention to the presence or absence of a member in the House. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I respect the member opposite for that question, but also for raising that unanimous consent motion in this House. And when it's endorsed by this House, it's endorsed by every member of this House. That's the first point. The second point is that, and this needs to be restated, is that there's three important factors here. The people that decide to lay charges are the independent RCMP officers, whom we respect and I hope all members respect. Second point is that the people that decide to lay charges are the independent Director of Public Prosecutors. And the people that decide to withdraw charges are also the independent DPP.
Honourable member for Milton.
The people that decided to withhold the documents from the defense of Vice Admiral Mark Norman was this government.
That's right.
Plain and simple. Mr. Speaker, it was only because of an abusive process motion brought forward by the Vice Admiral that we started to get a look at the documents that clearly showed that there was political interference in this matter, but we only got to see it after 6 months of fighting in court. Yes, the court had to order the release of these documents because the government said they wouldn't release them. Will they apologize to Vice Admiral Mark Norman?
Full Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, again, now I'm going to speak to everyone in this House, but especially that lawyer opposite who shares some of the same background as I do as FOC scholars in Britain. And what we learned when we were learning and training in Britain is that you respect court processes. The way it works on an O'Connor application for third-party records is you identify the documents. If there are claims of privilege, it goes to the court goes behind the claims of privileges, ascertains whether they are valid or not, and makes a decision. That's how you respect the rule of law and the independence of the judiciary. That's exactly what we did in this case and what we do in every case.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Order, please. Well, yes, precisely. Let's talk about the legal system. Twice, the Prime Minister said that Vice Admiral Norman would end up before the courts before charges had even been laid. First mistake. Second, the PMO kept all the information they could until the court had to order them, and that is political interference. Will the Liberal government and his Prime Minister, do what everyone expects, and that is formally apologize to Vice Admiral Norman? Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. What I would like to underscore are three things. First thing, the decision to do an investigation is taken by the independent RCMP. The decision to lay charges and have a trial is done by the DPP. And third, the decision to withdraw or stay those charges is also made by the public prosecution. They are independent. And you can even rest assured by these words.
Nor was there any contact or influence from outside the PPSC, including political influence in either the initial decision to prosecute or the decision to stay the charge.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's made all kinds of statements. One of them was that he didn't need a political lieutenant because he's a general. Well, let's talk about a true military member, Vice Admiral Norman. Now, he is a real person of respect and standing. Now, will the Prime Minister act like a leader and apologies? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, we have an enormous amount of respect for Vice Admiral Norman and all those men and women who work on behalf of Canada and for Canada, including police services, including the RCMP. Second, there was no political interference in this matter. It was impossible, actually, because the Director of the Public Prosecutions worked on behalf of the Ontario General Attorney. So if you have any questions, ask Ms. Mulrooney.
But Mr. Speaker, just because you didn't get away with the money doesn't mean you aren't guilty of trying to rob the bank. The Prime Minister refuses to apologize for the disgraceful way Vice Admiral Mark Norman and his family have been treated. We know the Prime Minister alerted the RCMP to investigate, refused to provide documents, and tampered with witnesses. He even had his lawyers ask the public prosecutor to engineer the issues at stake in his favor. When will the Prime Minister admit what he did was wrong and apologize to Admiral Norman?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
So allow me to walk the member opposite through this process. A demand is made for third-party records. 144,000 are identified. Then you cull that group to see which ones are responsive. 8,000 are then deemed responsive. Then claims of cabinet confidence are made not by members of the political staff, but actually by civil servants in this country. When those claims of privilege are made, the court then verifies are those valid or invalid. This happens every day in litigation around this country. There's nothing different in this case than in any other. The most important thing that didn't happen is that there was never a decision by a political person to interfere in this matter or any other matter.
Order. Order. The honourable member for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
No matter how you try to explain it, frustrating the process is still political interference. And it has tarnished the Admiral's reputation. The fabric of our democracy relies on all citizens being innocent until proven guilty, given a fair chance to defend themselves, and being equal before the law. But that's not what happened to Admiral Norman. So this House came together to recognize that Admiral Norman had been wronged and offered him an apology. But it wasn't unanimous. For the Prime Minister, it was sorry, not sorry. When will the Prime Minister apologize to Mark?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Ministry of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I take actually grave issue with actually challenging a unanimous consent motion that is delivered on behalf of this Parliament through you, which represents every member of this Parliament. But the most important thing is that they continue to assert political interference when it was not the case. Secondly, as I explained in French, and I'll explain again to that member in English so that she can fully understand it, is that in this case, the Attorney General, in this case, the Director of Public Prosecutions, was acting in the name of the Attorney General of Ontario. So in the event that there could have been any direct political involvement, it would have been done by the Attorney General of the province and not by the Attorney General of Canada.
Order. Order. I would ask the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary not to question the ability of members to understand. Order. The Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
So let's follow the money. So the Prime Minister gets lobbied by Loblaws and he gives $12 million to Galen Weston, but says it's about saving the planet. And then Galen's company votes to deny their workers a living wage. And while the Liberals are hosting photo ops at Loblaws, the Prime Minister exempting new tar sands projects from environmental review. What's with that? He's carrying on the same sellout of young people and the planet that have joined the Liberals and the Conservatives at the hip for decades. When is he going to admit that the billionaire class isn't the solution? They're the problem.
Honourable Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, there's something that has to be corrected here because it's actually a real problem that we are actually building better rules for approval of major projects. No one gets a pass. The whole point is making sure that we have rules that rebuild trust of the public in terms of how we review projects, that we work with Indigenous peoples, that we make sure that good projects go ahead in a timely way with clear rules. That is what we are doing. We are also tackling the climate change crisis. We are phasing out coal. We're ensuring a just transition. We are not flip-flopping on projects that are supported by an NDP government in BC. They're creating good jobs.
Order. Order. The Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay. Order.
They don't just have a climate crisis, they have a credibility crisis. So let's go back to talking about their friends in the billionaire class and the lessons the Prime Minister learned from the SNC debacle. I mean, it cost him what? His Attorney General, President of the Treasury Board, his right-hand man, and the head of the Privy Council. So to fix it, who's he bringing in? Now, oops, I got to be careful when I say that name. Ben Chin, the guy whose fingerprints are all over this scandal like a bad enforcer. So why is he promoting the backroom boys involved in the scandal when he kicked out the two women who stood up for the rule of law and stood up to this Prime Minister?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, what's clear is that the NDP have been holding hands with the Conservatives so much that they're following the same politics that they do. There was a time that the NDP would be actually concerned about jobs, about Canadians, and that's exactly what we are going to do, is remain focused on Canadians. The Conservatives have done whatever they can to try to discredit the work of this government. They oppose it at every occasion, and now that seems to be the NDP's approach as well. But the NDP should be proud to know that through the tax-free hand-child benefit, over 300,000 children have been lifted out of poverty. Canadians have created over 1 million jobs, and speaking, we're talking about good jobs. The economy is stronger today.
The Honourable Member for Richmond-Athabasca. Order. Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government refuses to refuse provinces in its decision-making. It is paternalistic, centralizing. Since 2015, there have been countless conflicts with the provinces. Illegal border crossing, carbon tax, legalization of marijuana, the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, and this week, the federal-provincial infrastructure announcements that were done in Quebec, cobbled together, and without Quebec in attendance. Why does the government refuse to work in partnership with our main partners, the provinces? The Honourable Minister of Infrastructure.
Conservateur pour être contre une annonce pour le désengorgement de la couronne nord de Montréal, Monsieur le Président. Les citoyens de la couronne nord de Montréal attendent depuis 1970 pour ce projet. Nous sommes fiers d'avoir investi 3...
I'm sorry to interrupt the minister, but apparently the interpretation is not coming through. Is it working? Yes. Order, please.
Alors.
Order, please.
Order. The Honourable Minister.
The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, it'll give me great pleasure to repeat. It would only take Conservatives to be against investing in decongesting the northern suburbs of Montreal. Citizens of this area have been waiting for decades for that project. We're proud for having invested $345 million in mobility in Montreal. We're being proud for having invested in the extension of Highway 19. We're proud for having invested in the P9 Bridge, and we're proud for having invested in a reserved lane for bus rapid transit. Order. The Honourable Member for Richmond-Athabasca. Order. Mr. Speaker, this government has succeeded in alienating the governments of Ontario, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, New Brunswick, British Columbia, and the Quebec, especially yesterday. This morning, the Premier of Quebec confirmed that he had submitted several projects to the federal government, and yet there had been no collaboration on the part of the Liberal government. Why does this government refuse to work in partnership with the province of Quebec and all provinces throughout Canada? The Honourable Minister of Infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, respect for Quebec means working for Quebec. It's more than just asking questions in the House. It's approving projects that Quebec submitted in time for the construction season. That's what the unions expect. That's what the workers expect, Mr. Speaker. And we're going to continue to invest to improve the quality of life of people throughout the country. We're going to continue working with Quebec. We're going to continue working with all provinces so that construction workers can work this summer.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
Toyota Canada released a poll today showing that half of British Columbians believe that fuel prices are too high and they will have to change their summer vacation plans. Prices have reached $1.80 a litre, a record for North America. And when the Prime Minister was asked about it, he said this is exactly what we want. But it's not what he wants. He's jetting around at taxpayer expense, burning fossil fuels to vacation in Florida and Tofino. Why won't the Prime Minister give taxpayers a break instead of engaging in high-carbon hypocrisy?
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
The price of gas has gone up 1 cent because of the price of pollution. But the party opposite, all they do is spread misinformation, whether it's Doug Ford or Jason Kenney or the party opposite, who refuses to actually tell their constituents constituents in their flyers that the biggest incentive that they can get through the tax system is a climate action incentive. Well, to all Canadians, for those in Manitoba, in Ontario, New Brunswick, and Saskatchewan, you're entitled to more money back. 80% of families will be better off. It's no longer free to pollute, but we're taking action on climate change.
Order. The honourable member for Carleton.
What they're giving is a small check before the election and a massive bill after it. It's the carbon tax trick. The reality is that according to the Financial Post, the carbon tax will cost a family $600 just for a trip from Toronto to Vancouver. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister takes trips to Tofino on the public dime. He goes to Florida, then back, then to Florida, and back again so that he can sneak in an extra Twitter photo op. Why won't he end the hypocrisy and give consumers a break?
Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, I feel like the party opposite, you're worried about costs. You should be worried about the costs that we are passing on to our kids, the cost of climate change. We have got an emergency here, and the party opposite is not telling the truth to Canadians. We've gone from $400 billion a year to over $2 billion, $400 million to $2 billion because of the cost of climate change. Why don't they step up? Why don't they step up for climate action? Why don't step up for the economy of the future and stop misleading Canadians?
Order. The Honourable member for Courtenay Alberni. Minister.
We have an emergency.
Order.
The last 3 years, we've seen the worst flooding and forest fires in BC history. On Vancouver Island in January, we had the worst windstorm in recorded history, the biggest snowstorm in February, the worst drought in March, and the forest fire season has already started. Wow. Climate change is affecting our forests, our oceans, our ecosystems, and things are escalating. But instead of introducing urgent action, the Liberals are offering more platitudes. When will the Liberals get serious and bring in urgent action to attack the climate emergency we're faced with right now?
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, it's like whiplash here in the House of Commons. On the one side, we have Conservatives that don't want to take climate action, don't seem to understand the economic opportunity. On the other side, we have a party who's attacking us where we're taking serious climate action. We're phasing out coal. We're ensuring a just transition for workers. We're making investments in energy efficient and clean solutions. We're making it no longer free to pollute. We're taking all the action we need to do. So I would ask all parties in the House, why not join us? Why not be serious on climate change? Why not think about the future for our kids that we want and the good economic...
Hello.
Order.
L'honorable.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Mr. Speaker, Quebecers want a government that has a real strategy to fight climate change. We're asking for a climate emergency to be declared, and the NDP is calling on the Liberal government to not follow up on the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion, to eliminate all federal subsidies to fossil fuels, and to be more ambitious in its GHG reduction targets. Mr. Speaker, given the climate emergency, will the Prime Minister tell his members to support the NDP motion?
And we know that First Nations are disproportionately impacted, but the subsidy that the NDP wants to eliminate would leave at least 24 First Nations in Ontario alone in the dark. Literally. These are communities that rely on the federal electricity subsidy program to maintain critical infrastructure like water facilities, like schools. They quite literally want to turn off the lights, heat, and power to the communities' schools, water facilities, leaving some 16,000 people in the dark. Mr. Speaker, while the NDP continues to put forward these policies, we will ensure thoughtful and effective climate change policies.
The Honourable Member for Sackville, Preston, Chesapeake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we see Conservatives across the country cutting access to French education, our government strongly believes that every Canadian should have access to an education in the official language of their choice.
Mr. Speaker, I was so happy to hear the minister say what she said at Simon Fraser University, and I'd like the minister to explain to the House what the government is going to do to respond to needs of official language minorities. The Honourable Minister for Official Languages.
It's who we are and what we believe in. And the reality that while the Conservatives are cutting services to French immersion and also Francophones, we are investing. There is a French teacher shortage in this country. We just reinvested $62 million to make sure that our kids have the capacity and the chance to become bilingual. Will the leader of the opposition stop taking his orders from Doug Ford and denounce these cuts that the Conservative government are doing in Ontario?
Order. The honourable member. Order. Order. L'honorable ministre du Tourisme doit être à l'ordre.
The Honourable Minister for Tourism will observe order.
Mr. Speaker, Tides Canada has made it their primary objective to stop the construction of any pipelines in Canada, especially those that would get Canadian energy to new markets. Sarah Goodman served as the Vice President of Tides Canada, and the Prime Minister has just appointed her to be his Director of Policy. Our energy sector has taken hit after this Liberal government, and this is another slap in the face to Canadian energy workers. Why did the Prime Minister choose someone who has actively worked to destroy our energy sector to be his Director of Policy?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources. Order.
Mr. Speaker, we are building pipelines, and Bridge Line 3 that we gave approval to is almost complete in the Canadian side. We are advocating for Keystone XL pipeline with the United States. We are moving forward on the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion in the right way. And if the members of the Conservative Party are really serious about their process, they would not have voted down to kill their process and shut down their process that will allow us to reach a decision on their project by June 18th. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Député.
The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, we've seen what happened to two former Liberal ministers in the context of the SNC corruption scandal, when they insisted on the principle of the rule of law being respected. While a Liberal minister's chief of staff did his best to intervene in this, can you believe that he was promoted and he tried to direct the former Attorney General and even members of her staff? Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister explain why all you have to do to get promoted in the Liberal government is to obstruct justice? The Honourable House Leader. Mr. Speaker, we've always respected our institutions. Our institutions are independent of government. We will continue to work for Canadians. We know that the Conservatives are continuing to debate policies and programs that are helping Canadians advance, making things more affordable for Canadians. This was not the case over 10 years of Conservative rule. We have a plan for the economy and the environment, which they did not.
General named Ben Chin as one of the most aggressive actors in the Prime Minister's attempt to interfere in the criminal prosecution of SNC-Lavalin. She testified that he directly threatened her staff. Think about this. The Prime Minister fired the Attorney General and kicked her out of caucus for defending our rule of law, but he's promoted Ben Chin to the Prime Minister's office after he worked to undermine our rule of law. Can the Prime Minister tell us how much of a bonus does Ben Chin get for doing the Prime Minister's dirty work?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, we've been clear that we were elected on a platform that committed to delivering for Canadians, and that's exactly why today we have an economy that's working for Canadians, and that's exactly why we've invested in Canadians, in skills development, and Canadians have created over 1 million jobs. Mr. Speaker, Canadians should be proud of the work we're doing, but we know that there's a lot more work to do. The Tax-Free Canada Can't Child benefit that we introduced 3 years ago today has seen almost 300,000 children lifted out of poverty. Over 800,000 Canadians are benefiting. The Conservatives continue to vote against these measures, and they continue to mislead Canadians because they have no plan of their own. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Barry Innisfil.
The Liberal plan, the careers and reputation of two accomplished and competent ministers were profoundly maligned by this Prime Minister. Both the member of Vancouver Granville and Markham Stouffville were punished for standing up for our rule of law and against the actions of this Prime Minister and his operatives. We found out today that one of those operatives, Ben Chin, who attempted to interfere in the criminal prosecution of SNC-Lavalin, has been rewarded. In what world is it right to reward those who attempt to undermine our rule of law and punish those who stand up for it?
Honourable Government House Leader.
We actually respect our rule of law, and we know that it is intact in Canada. We respect the independence of our officers of Parliament as well as our court system, something that the Conservatives have continued to undermine under their new leader, and something that they did under 10 years of Stephen Harper. All we know is that they have a new leader, but nothing has changed. They remain the party of Stephen Harper. But we on this side, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to focus on Canadians, and that's exactly why we lower taxes middle-class Canadians by voting and by increasing taxes on the wealthiest 1%. Conservatives voted against it. We brought in the tax-free Can't Child benefit. That's lifting 300,000 children out of poverty. What did the Conservatives do? They voted against it.
Hello.
Order. The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, while thousands of public service workers are waiting to be paid, the Liberals are throwing good money after bad. They've wasted yet more money on a system that doesn't work, $137 million since January. And they are employing IBM people to ensure the stabilization of Phoenix. IBM is raking in money while workers are still have to deal with Phoenix problems. This scandal has gone on far too long. Settle the Phoenix problem. The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we understand that it is unacceptable that there are still problems with Phoenix. We work day after day to try to fix this problem. We're working with unions on a system that might replace Phoenix. But the message to public service workers is clear. We're on the job. We're working on this. The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagot. Mr. Speaker, the death of Athéna Gervais, caused by a sugary alcoholic drink called Fucked Up. I would ask the Honourable Member to be judicious in her speech. I would encourage her to try to avoid unparliamentary language, but the Honourable Member can go forward. Mr. Speaker, the death of Athéna Gervais, caused by a sugary alcoholic drink, should have sounded the alarm. Experts and Éducalcool want these products to be made less attractive to young people. During a study on this new rules for these drinks, there was a group that manufactures these drinks that has had a lobbying campaign with Liberals and has even been in contact more than 100 times. Why do Liberals prefer to listen to powerful lobbies than protect our young people? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
And we, of course, mourn the death of any young person who came in contact with the drinks. And I do take exception, though, to the Honourable Member saying that we're somehow influenced by the industry, because we're not. And I think the Canada Food Guide is a very good example of where we looked at the best evidence and came up with a policy, came up with a food guide that is going to make Canadians the healthiest in the world. We take Canadians' health and safety very seriously.
The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Cartier. Mr. Speaker, the reaction of Liberals and NDP following the Green Party win in a by-election is hypocritical. It is pure electoral opportunism. The Liberals are finally waking up after 3.5 years of inaction. I have a very simple question. Will the Paris Accord targets be reached? Can the Liberals tell us, for once, that Canadians should know that they will not reach these targets. The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I think the Honourable Member is saying two different things. It's true that we have to fight climate change. We have a plan. I'd like to know from the Honourable Member what their plan is to fight climate change while boosting our economy. We have a plan for climate change. So why don't they work with us?
Jacques.
The Honourable Member for Portneuf, Jacques Cartier, asked a question.
Well, after taking a beating from the Greens in last week's by-election in BC, the NDP and the Liberals are now desperately trying to one-up each other on climate change. More fear-mongering by the NDP, more empty rhetoric and false information from the Liberals, who are desperately trying to distract from their own climate failures. The reality is, Canada has fallen way behind in meeting its Paris targets. The Liberals' own emissions report actually shows that. When will the minister finally admit that her government will not meet its emissions targets?
Honourable Minister of Environment.
Years ago, I was with the member opposite. We brought members of all parties to COP21, including the member opposite. We stood with the world to negotiate an ambitious Paris Agreement. I was extremely proud that we had members of all parties. Then what did we do? We came home and did the hard work. For 1 year, we negotiated with provinces and territories, Indigenous peoples, with all Canadians to develop a climate plan. But in the face of that, Conservatives continue to deny that climate change is a serious problem, that we are in a climate emergency, that we need to take action.
Order. The Honourable Member for Abbotsford. Order.
Mr. Speaker, the minister is in denial. She knows very well that her government has fallen way behind in meeting its Paris targets. Yes. Today we learned from the Parliamentary Budget Officer that it's costing the Liberals $175 million a year to operate their carbon tax scheme. Imagine $175 million to administer this cash grab. The reality is that the Liberals don't have a climate plan, they have a tax plan. When will the minister admit that her climate plan is not as advertised?
Honourable Minister of Environment. Order.
This day and age, Conservative politicians don't understand that the environment and the economy go together. There was a time when Brian Mulroney took serious action on environmental challenges. And guess what he did? He tackled the biggest challenge I remember growing up. It was acid rain. You know how he did it? He showed leadership. He listened to scientists. He worked with business. And what did he do? He put a price on pollution. Canadian companies innovated, and we tackled that problem. We can tackle climate change, but the only way we are going to do it, is by coming together as a country.
Honourable Member for Scarborough North.
Monsieur le Président, supporting young pursuing world-class interdisciplinary research is an investment that our government recognizes as important. Science and research are vital to ensuring Canada's continued innovative progress. Can the Minister of Science and Sport please tell this House about the New Frontiers in Research Fund, which will help support young researchers undertake high-risk, high-reward research?
Good question. The Honourable Minister.
I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for the excellent question. After a decade of neglect by the Harper Conservatives, we knew we had to invest in and modernize Canada's research system. That's why this week I announced the first winners of the New Frontiers in Research Fund. This fund will invest in international, interdisciplinary, fast-paced, and high-reward research. It will be the largest pool of funds for researchers in Canadian history. Unlike the previous government, we are taking action and investing in our researchers and students.
All right. Honourable Member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Mr. Speaker, when Terry Lynn McClintock was moved to a healing lodge last year, it took the Liberals months to do the right thing and put her back behind bars. Now she's seeking compensation after being back in jail for murdering 8-year-old Tori. She called the decision unreasonable. Tori's father has pointed out what's really unfair is the continued injustices of this correctional system. He's right. Will the Liberals finally stand up for Canadian families and promise to not give Tory's killer a dime of taxpayers' money?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, our hearts go out to all the victims of crime for the loss that they have endured. Correctional Service Canada reviewed its transfer policies in this case after careful consideration. Some of those policies were improved. You can be assured that the Government of Canada will very strongly defend its position.
New Westminster, Burnaby.
Just last year, $5 billion was funneled through BC's housing market. $47 billion was the amount laundered across Canada. As a result, homes are less affordable for people. Now, today, British Columbia launched a full public inquiry. But while the BC government takes action and shows leadership, federal Liberals have been on the sidelines. Will the Prime Minister finally show some leadership, agree to launch a joint public inquiry, and fully cooperate with the province of British Columbia?
Hear, hear. The Minister of Border Security.
Mr. Speaker, our government takes the threat posed by money laundering very seriously, and that's precisely why, Mr. Speaker, we introduced in Budget 2019 significant new measures and significant new investments to increase the RCMP, CBSA, and FinTrack's ability to deal with this issue. We've been working very closely with the Attorney General of British Columbia. I spoke to him just yesterday. I've assured him of our full cooperation and support in their inquiry. But, Mr. Speaker, we are not standing idly by. We brought forward new measures, and created new offences, new regulatory authorities, and new resources to deal effectively with this issue.
The
Honourable Member for Pontiac. Mr. Speaker, my fellow citizens in Pontiac know how important it is to protect fauna and
dolphins in captivity should be banned, and that shark finning is a practice that should be ended in Canada. And I agree. Can the Minister of Fisheries, Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard update this House and all Canadians on what our government has done to ensure that these inhumane practices have no place in Canadian society?
Honourable Minister.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci à mon...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague, the member for Pontiac, for asking about these important issues.
Fort Moody Coquitlam for their hard work on these files. Because these issues are so important, our government is taking leadership by supporting Senate amendments to Bill C-68 to include provisions to ban the captivity of whales and dolphins and prohibit shark finning in Canada. Our government is firmly committed to the protection of biodiversity and the humane treatment of marine mammals and sharks.
The Honourable Member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are refusing to allow Thursday's emergency meeting on Vice Admiral Norman to be televised. Canadians deserve transparency, but these Liberals would rather hide in the dark. Now, Vice Admiral Norman has said he has a story to tell that Canadians want to hear. Now, Canadians need to be assured that the Prime Minister isn't orchestrating another cover-up. My question is to the Chair of the National Defence Committee. Will he do the right thing and have our committee meeting televised live by the House of Commons?
Chairman of the Committee on National Defence. Now, the Honourable Minister, Honourable Government House Leader.
To answer a question, I have the privilege and opportunity to do so, and I now have the privilege and opportunity of reminding the member of the Conservatives that when it comes to the work that committees do, they're independent of this place. And I know the Conservatives cannot fathom that the Liberal members on committee will make their own choices, but they will be able to. And we've seen this on numerous occasions where committees are able to do the important work that they do, and that's why they are part of the process. And I would encourage the Conservatives to stop undermining the work of committees, and Canadians have not forgotten the playbook that they had put out.
Order. The Honourable Member for Bécancour, Nicolet Sorel. Mr. Speaker, the Canada-Quebec Agreement on infrastructure is very clear. Canada's only role in, with respect to these projects is its financial contribution. That's it. There are $200 million lacking for Quebec, for Quebec's public transit fund. Rather than announcing highways that they will not build 1 centimetre of, will the Minister of Infrastructure shoulder his responsibility and pay Quebec the missing $200 million? The Minister Mr. Speaker, there are different ways of working for Quebec. One is to ask questions in the House, and the other is to support concrete projects for the construction season. We got the request from the government of Quebec in 2018, and in October, Premier Legault made it a priority. Then my department approved it, and May 13th, I announced to Quebecers we will work in partnership with the Quebec government, and we will continue to do so, Mr. Speaker.
I would like to draw to the attention of honourable members the presence in the gallery of the finalists for the 2018 Shaughnessy Cohen Prize for Political Writing. Abu Bakr Al-Rabia, Winnie Young, Sarah Cox, Rachel Giza, Jacques Poitras, and Harley Rustad. The honourable member for Burnaby South is rising on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there have been talks between the parties, and I'm very hopeful that if you seek it, you will find unanimous consent for the following motion. Then, in light of the decision made by the United Nations Human Rights Committee on January 11th, 2019, which ruled that the ongoing sex-based hierarchies in the registration provisions of the Indian Act violate Canada's international human rights obligations, this House calls upon the federal government to bring into force the remaining provisions of Bill S3 and act to amend the Indian Act in response to the Superior Court of Quebec decision in Descheneux contre Canada, Procureur Général, which would remedy the discrimination no later than June 21st, 2019. Thank you.
Does the honourable member have the unanimous consent of the House to move the motion? No, there is no unanimous consent. The honourable member for Scarborough North is rising on a point of order. I have a few.
Mr. Speaker, we have had discussions